In my last Nissan Versa video, I changed the coolant on my car, so I'll put a card at the end of this video if you're interested in seeing it. But at the end of that video, I also noticed that my brake fluid is a little bit on the old side. It's about 7 years old, so let's go ahead and change that fluid. Let me start off by giving a little bit of a disclaimer. Brakes are nothing to play around with. It's a very serious matter. If you've never done something like this or you're not comfortable doing something like this, please just take it to a professional and let them take care of your car properly. After removing the cap off of the brake reservoir, there is a small filter or a strainer inside of here that we have to remove. I'm just going to use a small 90-degree angle pick, and you could easily get this thing out of here without damaging it. Now, the first step you want to do whenever you're doing a brake system flush is try to extract as much brake fluid as you can out of the reservoir. Unfortunately for the Nissan Versa, is they have like these baffles inside of here, and you can only get very little out of here. On most cars, you could extract almost all of the brake fluid from here, and this is absolutely where you want to start. It's just unfortunate that the Versa is set up like this, but it's still a good starting point. Now, I'm just going to use my large vacuum pump. It's normally what I use for jobs like this. You could use anything that extract fluid, even a turkey baster if you have one that fits in there. I've done it before. So yeah, here I am pumping that fluid out, and I'm giving it the classic teabag move. The brake reservoir on this car could be a little tricky to get to. Fortunately, there's a small panel you can remove from the bottom. You just go ahead and squeeze on the two small tabs and it should release. I tried to get mine off, but it wasn't really going, so I just said forget it. Fortunately, I have a long enough funnel to reach inside of here, so it's not that big of a deal. We're going to be using the .3 brake fluid. If you look at your cap, it's always going to tell you what type of brake fluid, and this one clearly says .3, so it's what I'm using. Now, whenever it comes down to brake fluid, never use something that's old, guys. If it's been opened and sitting on your shelf, just throw it away. Always start off with a fresh, brand new bottle that's been sealed, and that's because over time the fluid does go bad. So always start with a fresh bottle. Now, we're not going to be able to add a lot of fluid here because, like I mentioned at the beginning, there's baffles inside of this reservoir that prevented us from removing the majority of it, so we can only add a little bit. And try not to leave the caps off for an extended period of time. I'm talking about the bottle of brake fluid as well as your brake reservoir. Always put the cap on it whenever you can. Now that we got the initial drain and fill done at the master cylinder, let's move on to the rear of the car because we got drums, so I like to get the hard work done first, and it's furthest away from the master cylinder, so that's normally where you want to start. And as you can see, we got the 17s. She got the boots with the fur. Alright, they're just 15s, but I keep them clean though. Now, if you don't have an impact gun, you're going to want to loosen your lug nuts while the wheel is still on the ground. So grab the biggest ratchet that you have and loosen them up. Don't take them off, just loosen them. I like to lift up the rear end of the car right underneath the rear spring perch. It's a safe and secure place to jack up your car from. Now, never rely on a floor jack. Whenever you're lifting up your car, always use jack stands. A floor jack is just intended to lift up the car. It's not intended to be working on the car with it. So be safe about this, guys. Now, I'm only going to be working on one side. It's why I'm only doing one side at a time. But if you want to speed up the process, you could lift up the complete rear end and put 2 jack stands back here. And yes, my 17s have wheel locks because I don't want anyone stealing these bad boys. Well, in any case, if your car also has wheel locks on it, it should be in the glove box. Maybe check the armrest. With the wheel off of the car, if you look behind the drum, you'll see the bleed valve for the rear wheel cylinder. And unfortunately, they're real tiny on this car, so that sucks. They're prone to breaking off. But you're probably wondering, how am I going to bleed this thing? Well, I'm getting a bit ahead of myself. So let's rewind a little bit and I'll show you how to make a DIY brake bleeder. Grab your favorite beverage that comes with a plastic cap, ideally something that's clear. And we're going to go ahead and drill 2 holes in the cap. One that's small enough so the air can escape, another one that's large enough so that your rubber hose can fit inside of it. You want to find yourself a nice soft rubber hose, ideally something that's transparent. I have this one right here, but it's old and brittle and hard to work with, but I can't find the one I normally use. I'm going to go ahead and put something heavy in the bottom of this container to try to weigh it down because it has a tendency to tip over and make a big mess. It's happened to me before. So any counterweights at the bottom is a real good idea. And now we could add brand new brake fluid to the container. And let's go ahead and peel off this label right here because it's kind of misleading at this point now that it has brake fluid in it. And I'll just screw on the cap and make sure that the hose is completely submerged in the liquid, and we're pretty much good to go. I'm just going to go ahead and cut off this tip right here because we don't need it. And look how hard this thing cuts off. It just goes to show how old and brittle this hose is, which isn't ideal. So going back to the rear drums, we're going to go ahead and break free the bleed valve. I like to use a socket for this because it gets great contact on it. And just be really careful with these things because these things have a tendency to just snap off. And at that point, you're kind of screwed. So just take it slow. As soon as it cracks open, I go ahead and close it right back up immediately. And now we could grab our new brake bleeder that we just made and put it on the bleed valve right here. Once you have your brake bleeder attached, grab a wrench and break open the valve. On the Versa back here, it happens to be a 7mm, so it's what I'm using. And once you get that open, you'll see a little bit of brake fluid start to enter the line, and that's all you have to do. Do not unscrew this thing, guys. All you have to do is crack it free, maybe a quarter of a turn, maybe half a turn, and that's good enough. And now just get in your car and start pumping the brake pedal, and you'll start to see that fluid come out of the cylinder and into your plastic container. Now, one thing you got to be really careful with right here is you can't just keep pumping the brake pedal. You have to keep replenishing the fluid that's in the master cylinder. It's absolutely critical that you don't let this thing go dry. So what I was doing was maybe like 5 or 6 pumps of the pedal, and then go ahead and fill up your brake fluid again in the master cylinder. And that's all I did. I did not go past 5 or 6 pumps because it'll be a nightmare if you were to run your master cylinder dry. As you can see, I completely filled up our water bottle with old brake fluid, and I thought that was good enough. So I'm going to go ahead and close the valve and slowly remove our hose off of the valve right here. And that's pretty much it. We can move on to the next wheel. And I like to do both of the rear wheels before I move to the front of the car. Of course, make sure that the bleed valve is nice and snug. Try not to overdo it because these things snap off quite easily. I like to spray these things with some fluid film or anything that protects from rust. Here I am just using CRC. It's kind of what I do because they do have a tendency to rust in place, and then that's when they really start to snap off. And of course, don't forget to put your dust boot right back over it. After I'm done bleeding each wheel, I like to get in the car, turn it on, and put good pressure on the brake pedal and make sure there's no leaks at all before I move on to the next wheel. It's a good habit to get into. If you do encounter a problem, go back to where you just worked and fix it. Now, you did notice the fluid that was coming out of this wheel cylinder was pretty dark, right, in comparison to the new fluid that was in the container. Well, it's not so critical that you keep pumping until you get absolutely clear fluid out of it, because remember, you still have 3 other wheels to do, and honestly, you're never going to get all of the old brake fluid out this thing. The name of the game is just to change like 97% of it. You're never going to get that last little bit. It's no different from changing your oil in your car. You never get all of the oil out of your engine. As much as you like to think you do, you never do. So same exact process here. And at this point, I've already gone ahead and done the rear right and the front right, and now we're on the front left. So this is the last wheel right here, and I'm just showing you guys the same process but doing it on the front of the car. Now that the valve is cracked open, I could get in the car, pump the brake pedal a good 5 or 6 times, and then go back to the master cylinder and refill it with brand new brake fluid. And I'm just repeating this process over and over, as you can see in this time lapse, and I'm just going to keep doing it until I fill up my plastic bottle here. As you can see, the fluid coming out of the last wheel is much cleaner than the first wheel that we did. It's not 100% clear, and the main reason for that is because every time I moved down to another wheel, I didn't completely dump out the contents of my plastic bottle here. Other than making for a better YouTube video where I could show a clear, definitive before and after, me dumping out all the brake fluid out of my container would just be a waste of brake fluid. After doing a job like this, there's a few things I like to check. First of all, get in the car, make sure that the pedal feels nice and firm. It has all of the pressure that it should have. Once that's set, then I go back to the master cylinder and make sure the level is topped off where it should be. And then check all of your lug nuts, go around to each wheel, make sure all of your lug nuts are torqued down. I took a picture of the fluid that came out of its respective wheel as I was moving along. You could see how the fluid becomes more and more clear as we go. Now it's not 100% clear because of what I mentioned before, how I didn't dump out the contents of the bottle as I moved along because it would just be a waste of brake fluid. If you're wondering how much brake fluid I used to do this entire flush, I used exactly 42 ounces. Now that we got all the fluid changed, if we go ahead and use the tester once again, you can see we are reading green less than 1%. Before we were at 1.5%. If you're thinking, well, that's not a big difference, well, look at the scale here. It goes from 0.1% to 4%. That's a very small margin. So 1 to 1.5% is a big jump. Make sure it's all topped off and put the cap on it. Let's go out for this test drive. It's dark outside, as you can see, and it actually works out perfectly because at this time there's not a lot of people on the road, so you know, chances are low. You want to try to minimize any type of potential accidents or anything like that. So whenever you're done doing a job like this, always take your car out for a test drive before you do your daily commute. You know, what I recommend is like driving it around your neighborhood very slow. You know, start off at 5 miles per hour and then slowly ramp it up as everything feels fine. You start to build up more confidence in the car, then start to drive it a little bit quicker. I'm not saying to go speeding or anything. I'm just saying start to apply a little bit more pressure to your brake pedal. Now let's just say one of your bleeder valves were to fail because you didn't fully tighten it down. You rolling past a stop sign isn't the worst thing that could happen. You don't want to be on your daily commute and you end up rear-ending someone or flying past a red light because your bleed valve is leaking because you didn't fully tighten it down. So a thorough test drive is always or highly recommended. Anyway guys, I've been driving my car around the neighborhood. I've gone around like a good 4 or 5 times already, and I know you guys are gonna say I'm exaggerating, but this feels like a completely different car. It almost feels like if I just got my brakes done all the way around, all my pads, all my rotors, the rear drums, the shoes, everything. The way this car stops is it's I'm kind of lost for words right now. It's like a completely different car. I'm not even exaggerating. Have you ever been in an older car and it stops fine, you're perfectly used to it, everything seems normal, but then you get in a newer car, like say a car that's only 1 or 2 years old, and you feel like those brakes will give you whiplash because the brake pedal is so sensitive? That's what this car feels like right now, and it's never felt like that. Not to what I could ever remember. Even though I bought this car brand new, I don't recall the brakes ever feeling this sensitive. And it's crazy. It feels like a completely different car, guys. So it just goes to show how don't overlook your brake fluid. I'm guilty of that as well. I seriously thought, okay, I'm just gonna go ahead and change the fluid, not because it needs it, but it's just getting old, you know, and I figured I could get a good YouTube video out of it. But boy, was I wrong, because this made a massive difference. Over the years, the brake fluid starts to break down and absorb moisture right out of the air. So yeah, don't overlook it. I feel like I'm in a different car. This is amazing. I'm so happy about this. Anyways, let's go back to the garage and just give everything a quick look over, make sure everything's fine. But I'm really happy about this guy. My brakes have never felt this good on this car. So that's going to be it for this video. It feels good to finally be working on my own car and see some improvements come out of it. I hope the video helped you. If it did, please give it a thumbs up. As for what's next with the Versa, I'm thinking maybe the transmission fluid. So like always, thanks for watching.